On a tense Tuesday evening in the city's most luxurious restaurant, the high-stakes dare was issued. "I'll make you a millionaire if you serve me in Russian," mocked the powerful CEO, tossing an expensive titanium watch onto the white linen, certain he had exposed the young server's working-class limits. 3 years of hiding her past were about to shatter in the most unexpected way, but what she said next changed everything. "Before we start, your support means everything to us. Like, comment, and subscribe so we can keep sharing stories like this." The atmosphere in the penthouse-level dining room of the Zenith Tower was a study in hushed velvet wealth, a sanctuary for the city's most untouchable elite. Julian Vance, the 30-year-old architect of the massive Vance global tech empire, dominated table 4, his charcoal suit and silver cufflinks silently screaming billions, his expression one of icy, calculating boredom that often preceded a cruel decision. Anna Walsh approached with 2 wine glasses, her movements practiced and invisible, a skill she had honed over 3 years in the service industry since the destruction of her life. Julian barely glanced up as she set the glasses down, but his voice, deep and cutting, carried a tone that made the few surrounding diners subtly pause their conversation. "Anna," he said, reading her name tag with mocking deliberation. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and casually tossed a thick, platinum wristwatch onto the white linen tablecloth, the expensive metal glinting under the crystal chandelier. "I'll make you a millionaire if you serve me this entire 4-course meal, from the amuse-bouche to the digestif, in perfect Russian," he declared, the challenge ringing with impossible condescension. The silence that followed was absolute. $1 million. It was enough to stop running, enough to start fighting back, enough to pull herself out of the shadows and face the treacherous past that still haunted her. But accepting meant revealing the one skill that tied her directly to a life she had fled. She knew of Julian Vance. Everyone did. She knew his reputation for dismantling rivals, and her family had been one of them. Julian leaned back, a smug, satisfied smirk playing on his lips, confident that his public humiliation of the little waitress would be quick and definitive, proving her lack of sophistication. Anna's heart hammered against her ribs, but her eyes, hidden behind their practiced neutrality, held a sudden, dangerous flicker of defiance. She saw not just a challenge, but a terrifying, razor-thin opportunity. She straightened her spine, her external composure flawless, ignoring the slight tremor in her hands. This single transaction was the knife edge of her entire future, and she realized the only thing more dangerous than accepting his dare was letting his mockery go unanswered, leaving this man victorious. Anna's gaze dropped from Julian Vance's face to the platinum watch. It sat on the starched linen like a scorpion, a gleaming, arrogant punctuation mark to his impossible demand. The silence in the dining room stretched thin, pulling taut around their table 4. She could feel the peripheral attention of the other diners, the unspoken curiosity, the faint, second-hand embarrassment radiating from the woman at table 6, the bored entitlement from the man at table 3. They were all watching the spectacle. $1 million. The sum echoed in her mind, a chaotic, blinding number that represented more than just wealth. It was an escape pod. It was the end of 3 long, exhausting years of running, of cheap apartments with faulty locks, of scanning every face in a crowd on the subway, of waking up in a cold sweat believing Marcus, had found her. That money was not just a fortune, it was a fortress. A high wall she could finally build between her present and her hunted past. It was anonymity, it was freedom. But to claim it, she had to unlock the one door she had sealed shut, the part of her that was Anastasia Petrova, the accomplished, educated, betrayed heiress, not Anna Walsh, the invisible waitress. Her terror was sharp and immediate, a metallic taste in her mouth. It was not the fear of failure. She could speak the language as easily as she could breathe, a mother tongue she had tried to forget. It was the profound, suffocating fear of success. Speaking it, here, in front of him, in front of this specific man, was like setting off a signal flare in the dead of night, alerting the very monsters she was hiding from. Julian watched her, his lips curved in that lazy, confident smirk, one hand resting on his wineglass. He expected her to blush, to stammer, to apologize for her inadequacy. He saw her as a simple amusement, a prop in his evening's entertainment, a little game to break his boredom. And in that moment, her terror found a new, harder edge: contempt. He was just like them, just like Marcus. The same entitled arrogance, the same casual cruelty, the same belief that money could buy, break, or expose anything it touched. She had spent over 1,000 days being nothing, and now this man was using her cultivated nothingness as a spectacle. A cold, clarifying anger sluiced through her veins, chilling her fear into resolve. He wanted a show, he would get one. She lifted her chin, a subtle, fractional movement that felt monumental. Her eyes, which had been downcast and deferential, rose to meet his, clear and steady. She gave a single, sharp nod. It was not an act of submission, it was an acceptance of terms. A contract sealed, her trembling hands stilled, her spine straightened, the posture of the boardroom returning as if it had never left. She took one slow, deliberate breath, pushing down the memories, the pain, the ghosts of her past. She focused only on the task, the performance. She would give him exactly what he paid for, and she would take the $1 million he had so carelessly offered. Anna retrieved the heavy bottle of burgundy, the deep red liquid almost black through the glass. Her hand, the one that had been trembling just moments before, was now impossibly steady. She moved to Julian's left side, her posture perfect, her movements fluid and economical, the practiced grace of two distinct worlds colliding. Her heart was a frantic bird against her ribs, but her face was a mask of pure, professional calm, a mask she had worn in boardrooms that held the fate of thousands. She inclined her head slightly, her eyes meeting his. She began to speak. The first words that left her lips were not the hesitant, broken syllables he had anticipated, not the clumsy efforts of a student or a tourist. They were perfect, they were flawless. They were not just fluent. They were aristocratic, the old, noble accent of St. Petersburg, a language of ingrained privilege and generational power, a voice that belonged in a palace, not a restaurant. It was the voice of a woman who had never, not once in her life, needed a humiliating dare to earn $1 million. Julian Vance, a man who had faced down hostile corporate boards and bankrupted entire nations without so much as elevating his pulse, froze. His wine glass, which he had been lifting for a sip, stopped in midair, suspended by the sheer impossibility of what he was hearing. His smug, condescending smile did not just fade. It cracked and fell away, as if the muscles in his face had been instantaneously severed. He stared at her, his eyes wide and unblinking, the pupils dilating in pure, unadulterated shock. He looked, for one fleeting second, like a man who had seen a literal ghost walk up to his table and offer him wine. Anna continued, her voice smooth as silk, her tone perfectly deferential but laced with an unmistakable ancient authority that sent a shiver down his spine. "If Sir insists on this language," she said, her meaning clear and precise as she deftly uncorked the bottle, "then we shall use it. The vintage you have selected is a bold choice for the first course. It is heavy, perhaps too assertive for the delicate flavors of the amuse-bouche that is to come. I would have, if consulted, recommended the Sancerre, as its clean minerality would have complemented the oyster perfectly. But of course, your selection is final." Shall I pour? She poured the dark red liquid with a steady hand, the stream catching the light from the chandelier above. The restaurant, which had been merely quiet, now seemed to be holding its collective breath. The air was electric, charged with an invisible, crackling energy. The woman at table 6 had stopped pretending to eat and was watching openly. The man at table 3 had lowered his menu. Julian slowly, almost mechanically, set his glass down on the table. He could not speak. He was utterly, completely speechless. The power dynamic had not just shifted. It had inverted with the force of a tectonic plate. The waitress, his little amusement, his game, had just taken complete control of the entire room, and most terrifyingly, of him, using a weapon he himself had handed her. He was no longer a CEO playing a game. He was a stunned spectator. He tried to form a word, a question, anything, but nothing came out. He simply stared, his mind racing, trying to reconcile the simple black apron with the regal accent, the name tag with the inherent nobility. Julian's shock had calcified into a state of hyper-focused intensity. He was no longer the smug CEO. He was a predator that had just seen its prey do something impossible, something that defied the laws of his known universe. He watched her every move as she returned with the second course, a delicate, clear consommé. Her steps were silent, her composure absolute. She was no longer a waitress playing a part. She was an aristocrat forced into a waitress's uniform, and the distinction was now terrifyingly clear to him. She placed the bowl before him, her movements economical and precise. As her hand withdrew, she paused for a half-second, her gaze distant, fixed on a point just over his shoulder. She spoke again, her voice low, almost a whisper, not for him but for the ritual itself, to the fallen sparrow that still finds the sky. The silver spoon in Julian's hand, which he had just picked up, clattered against the fine china saucer with a sharp, piercing sound. He flinched, a violent, full-body recoil as if she had struck him across the face. His face, which had been merely surprised, drained of all color, leaving a stark, waxy pallor. His knuckles were white where he gripped the edge of the table. That phrase, it was not a common toast. It was not something one learned in a language class or read in a book. It was a private code, a motto, a line of hope whispered between him and one other person on earth, the one other person who was now gone. It was the last thing his foster father, his mentor, the true heart of the Petrova dynasty, had said to him 3 years ago before the final ruinous betrayal had taken everything. Julian's breath caught in his chest, a sharp, painful inhalation. This was not a coincidence. This was an impossibility. He stared at her, his mind racing, trying to connect the dots, trying to understand how this ghost of a woman, this waitress named Anna, could possibly know the most sacred, secret words of his past. His shock was now eclipsed by a cold, rising dread. This changed everything. This was not a game, not a dare. This was a message from a part of his life he had buried and mourned. His voice, when he finally found it, was unrecognizable, a low, dangerous rasp, all traces of mockery and arrogance burned away by a raw personal agony. "Who," he managed to say, his eyes locking on hers, "are you?" Anna did not answer his ragged, breathless question. She simply held her poise, her mask of professional neutrality clicking back into place, as if his visceral, violent reaction was nothing more than a minor disturbance. Her deliberate, cold silence was, in itself, an answer, a chilling confirmation that she knew exactly what she had said and the profound power it held. Julian, in turn, fought to regain his own composure, his mind racing. He was a man who processed the entire world in data points, variables, and strategic outcomes. The emotional shockwave had passed, and in its place, his analytical mind rebooted with terrifying, cold precision. This was no longer a personal shock. It was a variable, an anomaly he had to solve. The dare, the $1 million, the opulent restaurant itself, all of it evaporated from his consciousness. He was now on a hunt, and the stakes were infinitely higher. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table, his fingers steepled. He was not looking at her face anymore. He was watching her hands, the toast, the accent. It all pointed to one impossible lunatic conclusion he had been chasing for 3 long years. He had been searching for a ghost, a rumor, the sole, long-lost survivor of the Petrova line, who had vanished completely after the hostile takeover. The one person who, according to his mentor's last, desperate letters, could legally reclaim everything. And that person, that heiress, was rumored to be identifiable by one small hereditary trait. He had dismissed it as folklore, a tragic fairy tale, but now he had to know. He needed to see her right hand, specifically her inner wrist. He watched as she moved, clearing the soup bowl with practiced, silent efficiency. Her sleeve cuff, a crisp white, covered the exact spot he needed to see. He needed her to gesture. He needed her to move her hand, to expose her arm. This was no longer dinner. It was a high-stakes, covert interrogation. As she returned with the main course, a perfectly prepared filet, he spoke again. His voice was different now. Not arrogant, not emotional, but cold, flat, and sharp as a scalpel. "Where did you work before this?" he asked, his gaze fixed on her. The question was a probe, a lure, designed to make her react, to make her gesture in exasperation, to make her brush her hair back. Anna paused, setting the heavy plate down with meticulous care. "In the service industry," she replied, her voice equally flat, avoiding the trap. "And before that." "Education," she said, her expression unreadable. His eyes narrowed. He needed a clearer look. As she reached across him to adjust the silverware for the next course, her sleeve rode up by a single fractional inch. Julian's eyes darted down. There, just for a heartbeat. He saw it, a faint, star-shaped, silvery mark on the delicate skin of her inner wrist. It was exactly as his mentor had described it. Julian's breath stopped. It was her. It was her. The Petrova heiress, his entire, ruthless 3-year quest, his search for vengeance. All of it had just culminated in this diner, with this waitress, because of a stupid, arrogant dare. He felt a sudden, dizzying vertigo. He had found her, and she had no idea who she truly was. The 4-course ordeal finally concluded. Anna had performed her duties with a chilling perfection. Her movements graceful, her descriptions of each dish delivered in that impossibly aristocratic, flawless accent. She had met every requirement of his cruel dare. The $1 million, by all rights, was hers. She placed the final dessert fork on the table, her body rigid, waiting for her dismissal, for the payment, for this agonizing performance to be over. But Julian Vance made no move to acknowledge the end of the meal. He did not reach for his wallet or his phone. The platinum watch still sat on the table, untouched, irrelevant. The last of the other diners had departed, their curious glances and whispers finally gone, leaving table 4 in a pool of isolated light as the staff began to dim the chandeliers. The clatter of dishes being washed in the distant kitchen was the only sound. Julian stared at her, his eyes no longer wide with shock, but narrowed into cold, analytical slits. The predator was back, but this time the hunt was personal. He leaned forward, his voice low, intense, and stripped of all pretense, continuing to speak in the language she had used. "That was an impressive performance," he said, "but the dare is over. Now you will answer my questions." Anna's blood ran cold. The fragile confidence she had worn like armor began to crack, her fear flooding back in. "I do not understand. I did as you asked." Julian's smile was thin and dangerous. "You did far more than I asked. You used an accent that has been dead for a century. You used a toast that belongs to only one family, and you have a mark on your wrist that you think no one sees. So I will ask you again, who are you?" "It is just an accent," she replied, her voice losing its regal quality, becoming smaller, more breathless. "The toast is just an old saying I read once." He struck the table with his open palm, a sharp, flat sound that made her jump. "Do not lie to me. That is not the accent of a student. That phrase does not belong to you. Answer me. Who was your tutor? What was his name? Where did you study?" Anna backed away from the table, shaking her head, her carefully constructed composure shattering completely. "I am a waitress. My name is Anna Walsh. I have to go." She turned to flee. Julian was on his feet in an instant, his voice a commanding bark that stopped her cold. "You are not a waitress, you are a ghost. And I am not letting you disappear again." He threw several black $100 bills onto the table, far more than enough to cover the meal, but he left the watch. He was already moving toward the exit, expecting her to follow. His interrogation was not over, it was just changing venues. Anna's shift finally ended at 11:37 p.m. She moved through the final, menial routines of her job in a state of automated, buzzing dread. She polished the last of the silverware, her hands moving mechanically, her knuckles white, but her mind was a roaring, white-hot void. The confrontation had left her physically shaking, not with the simple fear of an angry customer, but with the profound, agonizing terror of discovery. She had survived his dare, yes, but she had done so by sacrificing the very invisibility that had kept her safe for 3 long, exhausting years. She had painted a target on her own back for $1 million she might never even see. Fleeing the main dining room, she avoided the pitying glances of the few remaining kitchen staff and stumbled into the cramped employee locker room. Her thin coat felt like paper, utterly useless against the chill that was already deep in her bones. She pushed open the heavy steel service door, the one that led to the side street, not the grand lobby. The cold, damp November air hit her instantly, a shocking, brutal contrast to the Zenith Tower's perpetually controlled 72-degree velvet warmth. The alley was dark, narrow, and smelled sharply of wet cardboard and the old grease from the kitchen ventilation fans, a grim, utilitarian space walled in by sheer brick. It was lit only by a single, flickering fluorescent bulb above the door, casting long, unreliable shadows that danced like ghosts. She pulled her thin coat tight, her only coherent thought to get to the subway station 3 blocks away, to her small, anonymous apartment, to slide the deadbolt and the chain, and to pray that he had been satisfied with his cruel game and had already left. But a long, black shadow blocked the mouth of the alley where it met the empty street. It was a shape of impossible wealth and power. A sleek, black Maybach, a car that cost more than the entire building she lived in, was parked illegally on the curb, its engine silent, its polished surface reflecting the sickly yellow street lamp. Its presence in this service alley was an omen, a predator waiting patiently outside the mouse hole. Leaning against the driver's side door, perfectly silhouetted, was Julian Vance. His suit jacket was unbuttoned, his tie loosened, but he looked no less imposing. If anything, out of the context of the opulent dining room, he looked more dangerous, more elemental. He was not looking at his phone, he was waiting, for her. Anna froze, her hand still on the cold metal door handle. He pushed off the car and took 2 precise steps, planting himself directly in her only path to the street. His demeanor was utterly changed. The smug arrogance was gone. The cold, calculating boredom was gone. In its place was a raw, commanding intensity, a desperate, almost feral energy that was far more terrifying than his mockery. His eyes were locked on her, analytical and piercing. Anna's body language screamed defense. She took an involuntary step back, her shoulder blades hitting the rough brick wall. She looked left, then right, but the alley was a dead end in both directions, save for the path he now blocked. "Julian," he said, his voice flat, cutting through the cold air. He had not brought the money, not the watch, none of it. "The money is irrelevant. It is in an account in your name. I had my bank transfer it the moment you started speaking. I do not care about the money." He took another step closer, closing the distance between them. She could see the fine detail of his face now, the clenched jaw, the absolute focus, the almost painful confusion in his eyes. "I care about what I heard. I care about what I saw. You are not a waitress. You are not Anna Walsh. Tell me who you are. Now." His words were not a request. They were a command, backed by the weight of a world she thought she had escaped forever. Julian's command, "Tell me who you are," now hung in the cold, damp air of the service alley, an ultimatum that left no room for evasion. Anna felt the rough, cold brick press against her back, a dead end in every sense. He was too close, his tall frame blocking the only exit to the street, his grey eyes probing, analytical, and filled with a dangerous, unfamiliar urgency. The adrenaline that had carried her through the dare, through the sheer audacity of her performance, had evaporated, leaving behind a cold, nauseating dread. She saw in his face that the lie was over. The cheap waitress uniform, the name tag, the 3 years of practiced invisibility. It had all been shredded in a single night by his arrogant, impossible demand. He knew. He might not know the specifics, but he knew she was a lie, a ghost, and he was a man who clearly did not tolerate anomalies. The futility of her disguise, the sheer exhaustion of her long-running terror crashed over her. She had nowhere left to run. Her shoulders slumped, a fractional movement of profound defeat. She looked past his expensive suit, past the Maybach, to the sliver of polluted night sky. The secret had been a suffocating wait for 1,095 days. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was how it was always meant to end, not with a killer in the dark, but with a rival CEO in an alley demanding the truth. She finally met his gaze. Her own eyes were no longer frightened or defiant. They were just empty, hollowed out by grief. "My name," she said, her voice low and steady, yet cracking under the weight of the words. "My name is not Anna Walsh. It is Anastasia Petrova." The name hung in the air between them, thick and heavy with the shared, brutal history of corporate warfare. Petrova. The dynasty that Vance Global had feasted on. The rival company that had collapsed so spectacularly, so completely 3 years ago. Julian's expression remained rigid, but she saw a new, sharper light ignite in his eyes. He knew the name. Of course he knew the name. He had been the primary beneficiary of its destruction. "I am the last daughter of that house," she continued, her voice dropping to a near whisper, forcing him to lean closer, their faces now only inches apart in the dim light. "My family was not just beaten in business, they were systematically destroyed. The hostile takeover was a lie. It was a cover for the most brutal kind of theft, orchestrated by a man inside our own walls. A man who betrayed my father, who seized everything, and who wanted to ensure there were no loose ends, no heirs, no one left to challenge his claim. I am hiding Julian Vance because that man Marcus Thorne is still hunting for me. He wants me silenced. He wants me dead. And you," she finished, her gaze unwavering, "by recognizing my accent, by forcing me to speak, you have just found me. You have found the one person he is terrified of. You have found the ghost he thought he had buried." Julian's entire body went rigid, his high-finance, predatory focus shattering into something raw and profoundly human. He took an involuntary step back, a mirror image of her own retreat, as if the name Anastasia Petrova had been a physical blow. The blood drained from his face, leaving him pale and shaken, his eyes wide with a dawning, agonizing recognition. "Marcus Thorne," he repeated, his voice a low, strangled rasp, the sound ripped from his throat. He said the name not as a question, but as a curse, a confirmation of his life's darkest shadow. He looked away from her, his gaze lifting to the dark, indifferent sky above the alley, his carefully constructed CEO mask completely gone, revealing a vulnerability, a deep, ancient pain that stunned Anna into silence. "You think," he began, his voice rough with an emotion she could not place, "you think I built my empire by feasting on your family's scraps. You think I was just another vulture picking at the bones." He laughed, a short, bitter, joyless sound that echoed off the damp brick. He turned back to her, his eyes blazing with a grief so intense it felt like a physical heat. "Marcus Thorne did not just destroy your family, Anastasia. He destroyed mine first. The man who raised me, the man who took me from nothing, who taught me everything, my foster father, my mentor. His name was Mikhail Petrova. He was the heart of that company. He was the last honorable man in that boardroom. He was your uncle. And I watched Marcus Thorne, his closest advisor, the man he treated like a son, betray him, bankrupt him, and push him into an early grave." Julian's hand clenched into a white-knuckled fist at his side. "I have spent every day for the last 3 years building an empire strong enough, ruthless enough, to tear down the man who did that. I have become a monster to hunt a monster. And that toast," he said, his voice finally breaking, "that toast about the fallen sparrow, that was his, that was our phrase. The one we said when Marcus began his takeover, the promise that we would find a way to fight back. I thought he was the only other person on earth who knew it. I thought it died with him." He stared at her, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place with a terrible, clarifying click. His ruthlessness was not for greed, it was for vengeance. He had been hunting Marcus, and in his hunt, he had just stumbled upon the one person, the one true heiress, who held the real key to his mentor's legacy. He had not been her enemy. He was her only possible ally. The silence that followed Julian's confession was heavier and colder than the alley air. Anastasia stared at him, her mind struggling to recatalogue this man. He was not the vulture who had picked her family's bones. He was the avenger who had been trying to hunt the killer. He was, impossibly, her uncle's protégé, the foster son Mikhail had spoken of with such pride, the brilliant, ruthless boy he had loved. She had seen him as a monster, but he was a monster forged from her own family's tragedy, a weapon pointed in the same direction. Julian, in turn, watched her, his strategist's mind clicking back into place, the raw grief receding, replaced by a sudden, brilliant, terrifying clarity. For 3 years, he had been fighting a war of attrition against Marcus Thorne, a war of finance and shadow takeovers, but he had lacked the one thing he truly needed, a legitimate claim. He had been trying to avenge the Petrova dynasty from the outside, while all this time the dynasty itself, the living, breathing, legal embodiment of it, was hiding in plain sight, serving him wine. He looked at her, truly looked at her, not as a waitress, not as a ghost, but as the missing piece, the master key to the entire kingdom. He was the sword, but she was the rightful hand to wield it. His voice was low, intense, all business, but now it was the business of allies, not enemies. "The $1 million is yours," he said, his tone final. "It was in your account before I left the restaurant. That was a transaction, a stupid, arrogant dare that by some miracle led me to you. But what I am offering you now is not a payment. It is a partnership." Anastasia's breath hitched. "A partnership. I have the resources, the power, and the legal army to protect you, to bring you back from the dead. You have the knowledge, the name, and the legal standing to reclaim what is yours, and we both have the same enemy, Marcus Thorne. He took a step closer, not threatening this time, but as an equal. I am offering you something more than money. I am offering you revenge. Help me destroy him. Anastasia looked at his outstretched hand. It was not the hand of a bully offering a payout. It was the hand of a co-conspirator offering a war. She had spent 3 years running from her name. Now this man, the one man she thought was her greatest threat, was offering her the chance to take it back, not just as a name, but as a weapon. She was tired of running. She was tired of being invisible. She looked at his hand, then at his intense, waiting eyes. Slowly, her own trembling hand rose, and she placed it in his. The alliance was forged. Julian did not take her to a police station. The police were useless in a war fought with offshore accounts and proxy boards. Instead, the Maybach slid silently through the sleeping city, descending into a private, subterranean garage beneath the Zenith Tower itself. He led her to a dedicated elevator which opened directly into his penthouse. The space was vast, cold, and minimalist, all glass and steel, with panoramic windows showcasing a glittering, indifferent city below. It was not a home. It was a fortress, a high-tech, sterile observation deck from which he waged his wars. He poured her a glass of water, his movements precise, but his energy was thrumming, a high-voltage current of adrenaline and disbelief. He began to pace in front of the window, a caged tiger who had just found the key to his cage. The legal situation is complex, he began, his voice tight. Marcus Thorne is a brilliant sociopath. He didn't just steal the Petrova assets, he locked them away. He controls the company, yes, but he doesn't own it, not fully. The core assets, the original charter, the real power. It is all frozen, trapped in a series of interlocking legal trusts that even he cannot break. He can only manage it, bleed it dry, but he cannot claim it. He stopped and faced her, his eyes burning with an intensity that made her skin prickle. For 3 years, I have been trying to find a way to break those trusts. I have been seeking justice for Mikhail, for your family, but I was missing the key. Mikhail told me, in his last letter, that the trusts were designed to be unbreakable by anyone except a direct line heir. Someone who could prove their identity not just with a name, but with something biology itself had signed. He called it the Petrova star. He said it was a hereditary mark, a small, unique birthmark passed down only in the primary bloodline. He told me to find the heiress with the star. Julian laughed, a dry, sharp sound. I thought he was mad, grieving. I thought it was folklore, a desperate old man's fairy tale. I searched for you, for Anastasia Petrova, but you had vanished. I assumed you were dead, until tonight. He crossed the room in 2 strides, stopping directly in front of her. His gaze was fixed on her right hand, which she had unconsciously wrapped around the cold water glass. It was not just the accent, Anastasia. It was not just the toast. It was what I saw when you reached for the wine. He gently, almost reverently took her hand. His touch was warm and firm. He turned her arm over, his thumb brushing back the cheap, frayed cuff of her waitress uniform. He angled her inner wrist to the cold moonlight streaming through the window, and he pointed. There, on her pale skin, a faint, silvery, star-shaped mark she had had her entire life, a blemish she had never given a second thought. I was not just looking for a ghost, Julian whispered, his voice rough with awe. I was looking for the heiress. This mark proves it. This is the Petrova star, the entire company, Anastasia. Everything Marcus stole. It is all, legally, undeniably, yours. 3 days later, Anna stood not in a service alley, but in the sterile, sun-drenched expanse of Julian's primary office on the 90th floor of the Zenith Tower. She was no longer Anna, the waitress. She was Anna Walsh, Julian's new temporary executive assistant, dressed in a simple, severe black pantsuit. he had procured for her. She was a ghost haunting her own past, present in the one place she should not be. The glass door slid open with a whisper, and Marcus Thorne entered. Anna's heart hammered so violently she was sure he could hear it. He was exactly as she remembered, perhaps even more handsome, his tailored blue suit exuding a warmth and charisma that belied the sociopath beneath. He was all charming smiles, perfect teeth, and disarming, friendly eyes. He was the snake who had charmed his way into her family, coiled around her father's trust, and then, when the time was right, injected his lethal venom. He strode directly to Julian, clapping him on the shoulder. "Julian, my friend, you have been a ghost yourself these last few days." He glanced at Anna, who was standing by the desk, holding a tablet, her head dutifully bowed. His gaze passed over her and through her, dismissing her as irrelevant office furniture, a nobody, just as Julian had. He did not recognize her, not even a flicker. 3 years, a different hair color, and the utter lack of power had made her invisible. "New assistant?" Marcus asked, turning back to Julian. "You finally got rid of that last one. Good. This one looks more efficient, less talkative." Anna's fingernails dug into her own palm. Julian's expression was cold granite. "Anna Walsh. She is handling the new acquisition files." Marcus's smile widened. "Ah, yes, the reason I am here, the Petrova merger." He moved to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down on the city, a king surveying his domain. "It is the final piece, Julian, the last of the old, dusty accounts. Once we liquidate this, once we fold the last of the Petrova name into our joint venture, we will be unstoppable." He turned, his smile still in place, but his eyes were cold. He had no idea he was speaking to the two people on Earth with the power to stop him. He picked up a crystal decanter, pouring himself a drink. "Just be careful with this new Petrova acquisition. It is an old, messy estate. Some old accounts are better left buried. You never know what might crawl out of the grave, still thinking it has a claim." His casual, chilling threat hung in the air. Anna kept her head down, her entire body rigid, fighting the urge to either flee or attack. Julian, for his part, did not flinch. "I will keep that in mind, Marcus. In fact, I have already started a full audit of all those dusty accounts." Marcus laughed, raising his glass in a toast. "Excellent. That is why we are partners. We leave no stone unturned." The next 3 months were a blur of encrypted files, sleepless nights, and the incessant, quiet hum of high-end servers. The sterile, glass-walled conference room in Julian's penthouse, which overlooked the city from 91 floors up, became their war room. The vast, empty space was soon cluttered with whiteboards covered in complex diagrams, corkboards pinned with corporate structures, and a constellation of empty coffee cups and takeout containers. Anna, or rather Anastasia, was reborn. The hesitant, haunted waitress was gone, replaced by the brilliant, relentless strategist she had been trained to be. She was no longer a ghost. She was the hunter. She worked tirelessly alongside Julian's forensic accounting team, but she was not their assistant. She was their guide. She held the map to the ruins, the institutional knowledge that Julian's team lacked. She knew Marcus's mind, his methods, his digital fingerprints. She remembered the old, forgotten servers, the legacy code he thought no one else understood. Julian, in turn, was her unwavering shield. He handled the outside world, creating a firewall of corporate plausible deniability that kept Marcus blissfully unaware, still believing Anna Walsh was just a new, efficient assistant. He watched her work, his initial awe transforming into a deep, profound respect, and then something warmer, something more personal. He saw the mind Marcus had tried to erase, the brilliance he had tried to bury. He would find her asleep at 4 a.m, her head resting on a stack of legal briefs, and would gently drape his own suit jacket over her shoulders rather than wake her. Their partnership forged in an alley over a shared tragedy, deepened. It was rebuilt in the late-night silences, in the shared, triumphant glances when they unlocked another layer of corrupted data. In the quiet, supportive hand he would place on her shoulder when she hit a dead end. The power imbalance of the restaurant, of the dare, was a distant memory. They were equals. One Tuesday night, staring at a line of code she recognized, she gasped. He did not bury the main ledger. He renamed it. He hid it as a depreciated asset file from 1998. She typed, her fingers flying across the keyboard, and the screen lit up with the one thing Marcus thought he had deleted forever: the smoking gun. A complete, uncorrupted record of every illegal transfer, every stolen asset, all tied directly to a series of offshore accounts in his name. Julian looked from the damning evidence on the screen to her face, her eyes bright with a mixture of victory and unshed tears. "You are magnificent," he said, his voice quiet, all traces of the cold CEO gone. "My mentor, your uncle, he would have been so proud of you." Anastasia finally let herself believe it. She leaned back, exhausted but whole. She was not just a survivor anymore. She was ready. They were ready. The boardroom on the 92nd floor was a cathedral of glass and steel, designed for intimidation. A single 50-foot slab of polished black granite served as the table, reflecting the cold, gray morning sky. The remaining 6 members of the board, old guard titans of industry who had known both the Petrova family and Julian's mentor, were already seated, their expressions a mixture of confusion and anxiety. They had been summoned by Julian Vance at 7 a.m. for an emergency meeting regarding the final Petrova asset liquidation. At the head of the table, Julian sat perfectly still, his calm so absolute it was more terrifying than any rage. He was a predator in complete control of his environment. And to his right, in the seat traditionally reserved for his chief counsel, sat Anastasia. She was no longer Anna, the assistant. Her transformation was complete. Dressed in a severe charcoal suit, her hair pulled back, she was the embodiment of her lineage, poised, focused, and armed with the irrefutable truth. Her files were arranged before her with digital precision. The door slid open, and Marcus Thorne strode in, radiating warmth and confidence. He was the last to arrive, a deliberate power move. He smiled, a wide, charismatic flash of white teeth, clapping one of the older board members on the back. "Julian," he said jovially, taking his seat opposite Anastasia. "An emergency meeting at this hour. You know how to spoil a man's breakfast. What is so urgent that it could not wait for our 10 am?" Marcus's eyes flicked to Anastasia, lingered for a half-second, and dismissed her. He still saw the efficient, quiet assistant, Anna Walsh, and found her presence at this high-level table a minor, amusing curiosity. Julian let the silence stretch, his gaze cold. "We are here, Marcus, to finalize your proposal, the complete liquidation and absorption of the last remaining Petrova Trust assets, your new merger, as you call it." Marcus's smile widened. He spread his hands in a gesture of magnanimous victory, believing this was his final triumph. "Wonderful. Then let us sign the papers. I have a flight to Zurich at noon." He reached for the folder in the center of the table. Julian's hand covered it first. "Not yet." He inclined his head toward Anastasia. "We have one final consultant who needs to review the deals." "Origins. Thank you for coming, Marcus. Miss Walsh has a brief presentation on the historical discrepancies she has found in the Petrova ledgers." All eyes in the room swiveled to Anastasia. Marcus's smile faltered, a flicker of genuine annoyance, but not yet alarm. He still did not see the ghost. He just saw an obstacle. The trap was set. The bait was taken. Julian's voice was cold and flat. "Miss Walsh, if you please." Anastasia stood. The movement was fluid, confident, and utterly arresting. The 6 board members, who had barely registered her presence, now found their attention locked on her. This was not the quiet, efficient assistant they had seen fetching coffee. This was a woman who commanded the room, her posture radiating an authority that felt older and deeper than Julian's. She clicked a remote, and the massive screen at the end of the room lit up. "My name is Anna Walsh," she began, her voice as clear and precise as a diamond. "I am a forensic consultant retained by Mr. Vance to audit the Petrova estate files." She looked directly at Marcus Thorne, her gaze level and devoid of all emotion. "Mr. Thorne, you were correct. There were discrepancies in the old accounts. Specifically, in a depreciated asset file from 1998, which, upon inspection, was not an asset file at all. It was a hidden ledger, a second set of books. For the next 20 minutes, Anastasia systematically, calmly, and brilliantly dismantled Marcus Thorne's entire life. She spoke in clear, concise, brutal English, laying out a 3-year conspiracy of breathtaking complexity. She detailed the creation of 12 offshore shell corporations in the Cayman Islands, all registered to a holding company with a single anonymous director. She then displayed the wire transfers, millions upon millions siphoned from the Petrova operating budget, disguised as consulting fees, which she traced directly to those offshore accounts. She showed the board the encrypted emails, recovered from the old server, where Marcus gave the orders to his subordinates to cook the books, to falsify the quarterly reports, to create the very financial crisis that had justified the hostile takeover. She showed them the digital signatures, the IP addresses, the exact timestamps. She unraveled his meticulous criminal masterpiece thread by thread, until all that was left was his raw, naked greed. The boardroom was utterly silent, save for the sound of her voice. The board members were pale. One man looked physically ill. Another, Mr. Harrison, stared at Marcus with an expression of pure, cold loathing. Marcus himself was no longer smiling. His casual arrogance had evaporated, replaced by a rigid, white-knuckled stillness. He stared at Anastasia, his eyes no longer dismissive, but burning with a dawning, murderous hatred. He did not see an assistant. He saw the architect of his ruin. Anastasia clicked to her final slide. It showed a single account number in Zurich, the final destination for all the stolen funds. The account name was not Marcus Thorne, it was simply Legacy. "As you can see, gentlemen," she concluded, her voice never wavering, "this was not a merger, it was a theft. A meticulously planned, 3-year heist, and the man who orchestrated it is sitting at this table." The silence in the boardroom was absolute, a heavy, suffocating vacuum left in the wake of Anastasia's final damning word. For a long, suspended moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the building's ventilation. Marcus Thorne sat perfectly still, his face a rigid mask, his eyes fixed on the screen, on the Zurich account number that represented his life's work, his masterpiece of theft. Then he began to laugh. It was not his charming, charismatic laugh. It was a high, thin, ugly sound, ripped from his throat, devoid of all humor. He pushed his chair back violently, the heavy wood scraping loudly against the granite floor, and surged to his feet. His charming facade did not just slip. It shattered into 1,000 pieces, revealing the vicious, cornered animal beneath. His face was contorted, flushed a deep, mottled red, a vein throbbing wildly at his temple. "You," he hissed, his voice a venomous spray, pointing a shaking finger at Anastasia. "You." He turned to the stunned board members, his arms spread wide in a gesture of grotesque appeal. "You are not seriously going to sit here and believe this nothing, this waitress." His voice cracked on the word, loading it with every ounce of classist vitriol he possessed. The boardroom erupted in a cacophony of low, shocked murmurs. Mr. Harrison started to speak, but Marcus shouted over him. "Look at her. Just look at her. Do you have any idea who this is? This is a nobody. a failed analyst I fired 3 years ago for gross incompetence and emotional instability. She is a vindictive, pathetic little ghost, trying to blame me for her own failures. And you, he spat, turning his fury on Julian, who sat watching him perfectly calm. You brought her in here, you let this gold digger, spin this fantasy. He laughed again, that same horrifying sound. How stupid do you think we are, Julian? Did you pick her up at that restaurant you frequent? Is that it? You slept with her, and in exchange, you promised her this little stage, this pathetic high school play of revenge. This is absurd. This is a circus. He slammed his fist on the granite table, his eyes wild with desperation. I built this empire alongside you. I secured the Petrova assets while you were still learning, and you are going to let this servant come in here and destroy my reputation with a PowerPoint presentation full of lies and digitally fabricated garbage. This meeting is over. This is slander. I will have her arrested. I will have you all ruined for this. His tirade was a frantic, desperate spray of bullets, aimed at everyone, hoping to create enough chaos, enough doubt, to obscure the cold, hard truth she had just presented. He was still, even now, underestimating her. Anastasia did not flinch. She did not raise her voice. She simply waited, with the patience of a predator, until his frantic, sputtering tirade ran out of air. Marcus Thorne stood panting, his chest heaving, his tie askew, his eyes darting around the table, looking for any ally in the stunned silence. Anastasia, perfectly calm, took a single, deliberate step away from the podium and toward the head of the table where Marcus stood. She looked him directly in the eye, her own gaze so cold and clear it was like looking into a frozen lake. When she spoke, the language was not English. It was the same, flawless, impossibly aristocratic Russian she had used in the restaurant, a language of power and nobility that resonated in the vast room like a steel blade. The two oldest board members, Harrison and Ilyasov, both gasped, their heads snapping up, recognizing not just the language, but the authority with which it was wielded. "My name," she said, her voice carrying an ancient, regal weight that her English had masked, "is Anastasia Mikhailovna Petrova. I am the daughter of Mikhail Petrova, the woman you tried to erase. The company whose assets you have been feeding on, the legacy you tried to steal. It is mine. You are in my family's chair. Get out." The checkmate was absolute. The words, understood only by a few, carried a power that transcended language. It was the sound of a queen reclaiming her throne. Marcus's face, which had been red with rage, went a stark, chalky white. The last of his bluster evaporated, leaving only the cold, clammy terror of a man who had not just been caught, but had been rendered utterly irrelevant. He turned his last desperate gambit to Julian. He smiled, a horrifying, trembling rictus. "If I go down, Julian, I am taking you with me. I am taking this whole company. Our finances are intertwined, our deals, our acquisitions. I will burn all of it. I will burn Vance Global to the ground before I let her take it." He was offering Julian an out, ruin or silence her. Every eye in the room turned to Julian Vance. This was his moment of truth, his empire or his integrity, his creation or his mentor's legacy. Julian stood up slowly, buttoning his charcoal suit jacket. He looked not at Marcus but at Anastasia, and he smiled, a genuine, proud smile. Then he turned to the head of security, who had been waiting by the door, Harrison. "Marcus is right about one thing," he gestured to Anastasia. "She is not a nobody. She is my new partner, and she is the rightful owner of this company. Escort Mr. Thorne out of the building. His assets are frozen, and his access is revoked, effective immediately." 6 months later, the city glittered below the penthouse windows, no longer a cold, indifferent sprawl, but a kingdom reclaimed. The panic of the boardroom, the fall of Marcus Thorne, and the subsequent legal firestorm felt like a lifetime ago. Marcus was gone, buried under a mountain of irrefutable evidence and litigation. His name a permanent stain in the financial history books, his assets seized. The company, now spectacularly restructured and reborn as Petrova Vance Global, was not just stable, it was thriving, built on a new foundation of transparency and integrity. Anastasia, no longer Anna, stood at the vast window, not as a guest, a consultant, or a ghost, but as its co-CEO. The glass was no longer a barrier between her and the world. It was a vantage point. Julian came up behind her, his presence no longer a threat, but a quiet, constant comfort. He did not wrap his arms around her. Instead, he stood beside her, shoulder to shoulder, equals in every sense. The cold, sterile fortress had become a home. "You did it," she said quietly, watching the endless river of headlights carving through the night. "We did it," he corrected. His voice, which she had first heard as a cold, sharp instrument of mockery, had lost its icy edge over the last 6 months, replaced by a warmth she had never thought possible. "You were the key, Anastasia. You were always the key. I was just the man blunt enough to keep smashing the lock." He smiled, a genuine, easy smile she now knew well. He reached into his pocket, but it was not a ring box. He pulled out the thick, platinum wristwatch, the one from that first night at the restaurant, the one that had started everything. It gleamed in the soft light of the penthouse. "I believe this is yours," he said. Anastasia looked at it, the heavy metal resting in his palm. It was the symbol of her deepest humiliation, the cruel wager that had almost broken her. "I do not want it, Julian. That was a transaction." He shook his head, his gray eyes soft. "It was a transaction. It was the most arrogant, stupid, and cruel thing I have ever done. And it was the single greatest moment of my life. It was the night I found you." He gently took her hand, the one with the faint, star-shaped mark. He did not try to put the watch on her wrist. He just placed it in her open palm. "$1 million was a terrible offer," he said, his voice low. "It was an insult. I would like to make a new offer." Anastasia's heart, which she had thought was finally calm, began to beat faster. What kind of offer? He did not kneel. He just held her hand, the watch heavy between their palms. "Half of everything. Half of Petrova Vance. Half of this penthouse. Half of my life. It is all yours, Anastasia, if you will take it. Not just as my partner in business, though you are that, but as my partner in life. Marry me." It was not a dare, it was not a negotiation. It was a plea. She looked from the watch to his face, the face of the man who had seen her at her lowest, her most invisible, and had helped her reclaim her power. She thought of the fear, the running, the terror. It was all gone. She, the fallen sparrow, had finally found the sky. She closed her hand around the watch, a symbol no longer of a dare, but of their impossible, perfect beginning. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Julian, I will." If this story about courage and hidden identities inspired you, please let us know with a thumbs up and comment below with your favorite moment. Your support truly helps us bring more powerful stories like this to you. To make sure you never miss another journey of justice and second chances, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. And finally, share this video with anyone who feels invisible or anyone who thinks their past is a burden. This story is a reminder that the very thing you are trying to hide, your secret history or your unique skills, might be the one key that unlocks your entire future. Thank you for listening.